The Imperium of Man is a nightmare. A fascist theocracy run on endless war, faith-fueled cruelty and bureaucracy so bloated it eats entire planets alive. And because of that, a lot of Warhammer fans see the Tau as the good guys. They're clean, efficient, technologically advanced. They talk about peace, progress, and something they call the greater good. Something almost unique in Warhammer 40k. But here's the uncomfortable question. What if the Tau aren't the good guys at all? What if they're actually worse than the Imperium of Man? Not worse because they're more violent, but worse because they're better at convincing you they're doing the right thing. In this video, we'll look at how the Tau went from using stone tools to a galactic empire in just a few thousand years, why their philosophy of the greater good is far more dangerous than it looks, and how their empire mirrors the darker sides of our own modern world, from economic soft power to re-education to wars fought in the name of liberation. By the end, you might still think that the Imperium is the most evil faction in Warhammer, but you might also start to wonder if the Tau are the most believable. I want to start with a quick history of the Tau Empire and a quick overview of them. This information largely comes from the Lexicanium and some codices. In the 35th millennium, the Mechanicus explorator fleet Land's Vision found the homeworld of the Tau Empire, Ta'au. Very clever stuff. It was inhabited by an intelligent population of aliens that were perceived to be roughly at a Stone Age level of development. They had mastered fire and the use of primitive weapons. This world was deemed fit for imperial colonization. Some specimens of the species were taken for study and dissection, but before the cleansing could begin, a violent warp storm erupted. This cut off the planet from the Imperium for the next 6,000 years. As is typical for the Imperium, they quickly forgot about all of this, and the Tau were able to develop in relative peace. Over the next few thousand years, they developed quicker than almost any other race in the galaxy. According to Tau mythology, during their development, they almost wiped themselves out. Similar to human history, they were divided into different factions that were constantly at war with each other. The only thing that saved them from destroying themselves through violence was the emergence of the Ethereals. During a particularly brutal siege at a fortress city called Phiotan, two Ethereals were able to calm the opposing forces through an authority that no Tau was able to resist. A little bit of foreshadowing there. The Tau quickly unified as a species and decided to develop their culture around a concept called the greater good, where each member of their society works toward the betterment of the whole. Their technology progressed rapidly, and they were soon able to achieve spaceflight. Over the course of the next couple of thousand years, the Tau would expand outward in great spheres of expansion. So far, there have been 5 of them. I won't go through the full history of each here, but I will give some important details and events. The first sphere of expansion lasted the longest and brought the Tau its first colonies, or SEP worlds. It also brought the Tau into first contact with other alien races. Some of these interactions went really well. The Kroot and the Nikasar, however you say that, would become vitally important to the Tau Empire as a whole. This contact didn't go too well for the Proctroon, however. They wound up becoming extinct through plague. The Tau SEP world of Bork-An is built on their homeworld. The Tau also came into contact with the Orcs for the first time during this sphere of expansion. While there were some attempts to create diplomatic overtures at first, these quickly stopped, and the Tau discovered that the best way to deal with them was through warfare. This phase of expansion was slow, as the Tau hadn't fully mastered faster than light travel. The solution to this issue was discovered on the innermost moon of the Tau homeworld, when a routine geological survey uncovered an alien vessel with an intact warp drive. Tau Earthcast scientists were able to reverse engineer this technology, and the Tau created their ZFR Horizon Accelerator engine. This wasn't able to go fully into the warp, however. The Tau ships were still limited to short dives into warp space, and are only roughly about a fifth the speed of their Imperial counterparts. But at least, they don't have to deal with many of the same perils of the warp. Just as a quick aside, things like this are really vague in 40k. We don't really know how fast Imperial ships are when they use warp travel. In some stories it takes about a year to cross the galaxy, and others it takes longer than a single human lifetime. Honestly, it's part of the fun of the lore. There is probably no real way to tell exactly how fast Tau ships are, other than that they're slower but more reliable than their Imperial counterparts. The really important and the really interesting thing is, though, that only a few thousand years after they had united as a species that almost destroyed itself through warfare using black powder weapons, they had spacecraft that were comparable to Imperial ships. The ships of both empires came into conflict at the end of the second sphere of expansion in the eastern fringe of the Imperium. The Tau had encountered some outlying human worlds. Many of these worlds were brought into the expanding Xenos Empire through trade and diplomacy. The Tau watercaste diplomats took full advantage of the fact that imperial worlds are often left isolated from the wider human civilization for generations at a time. This all came to a head with the failed imperial Damocles Gulf Crusade. A huge imperial army was able to make its way right into the heart of Tau space. They were only halted at one of the Corsept worlds of Daleth, in part because of the Tyranid invasion of High Fleet Behemoth. The third sphere went further into the eastern fringe of imperial space, but was stopped due to large imperial counterattacks. The Mechanicus also lit the Damocles Gulf ablaze and effectively separated the eastern border of the Imperium off from the Tau Empire. The fourth sphere almost resulted in complete disaster for the Tau. They were unable to advance west into the Imperium. To the east was nothing but dead worlds, ravaged by the Tyranid High Fleet Gorgon, and the Necron Sautek dynasty halted any further expansion. The development of a new form of faster-than-light engine allowed Tau ships to traverse their empire in a matter of days. Previously, this journey would take months. A huge fleet was assembled at a place called Numenor Point, but it was met with disaster. Such a large number of vessels using this new technology created a tear in real space. 3/4 of the fleet was destroyed, but the remaining ships were saved by a warp entity that the Tau have little understanding of. This entity was likely created by the psychic energies of the fleet's non-Tau auxiliaries who very much believed in the greater good. This experience has created a deep disdain for non-Tau species in the Tau survivors of this disaster. The Tau that survived came out in an area of imperial space called the Changlath Expanse. I think is how you pronounce that, lads, I'm not sure. There they fortified a number of new Sept worlds and space habitats. They then called this area the Nemyar Atoll. After a number of years, they were able to regain contact with the Tau Empire proper through that tear in space. This was discovered to be a wormhole and is now called the Startide Nexus. The Startide Nexus was the site of the fifth and so far final sphere of expansion for the Tau Empire. At first, this expansion was horrifically mauled by a surprise attack by the Death Guard Chaos Space Marines. Since then, it has been expanding and gaining ground for the Tau Empire. I'm not entirely sure how the Death Guard would be able to lay a surprise attack on anyone, even in space, but I guess the Tau just didn't really know much about chaos at the time. There is currently a sixth sphere of expansion being planned by Tau leadership. This is being done with all of their current knowledge of chaos and demons in the warp. So what is the underlying philosophy behind all of this warfare and expansion? What justification do the Tau give for their aggression that is seemingly so accepted by the multitudes of other races that they come across? In the Tau language, it's called the Tau Va. This is the relatively simple philosophy that the life of any individual is of less importance than the needs of the Tau Empire itself. Tau and those that follow this creed will undergo any hardship or suffering without a second thought if they believe it will serve this greater good. One of the most taboo things in Tau society is to put personal ambition, hubris, vanity, or selfishness above the needs of the Tau Va. Those who put the service of the greater good above their own lives are lauded. Those who put their own needs first are seen as mentally deficient and are sent to re-education facilities. The Tau feel genuine pity for those that do not or cannot adhere to the Tau Va, and they feel that it's both their destiny and duty to bring their way of life to every sentient individual in the galaxy. There are some benefits to this way of organising society. While individuals may have almost no say in their own life choices, are unable to show much individualism or gain much in the way of private wealth, there is no poverty or squalor in the Tau Empire. At least there's none that we can see, and it's heavily implied that the quality of life for individuals, regardless of species, is better in the Tau Empire than most other places in the galaxy, with very few exceptions. Compared with the lives of those who live under other regimes, there is plenty to like about living under the Tau. In my video on threats to the Imperium, which should be linked somewhere here and down in the description, I've already spoken about this in a little detail. One of the main ways that the Tau is a threat to the Imperium, though, is that they basically serve as its mirror. The Imperium is written as one of the most fascistic and nightmarishly unequal societies imaginable. One of the worst things about the Imperium is how much of its resources and wealth are taken by its leadership and how little the vast and overwhelming majority of people have. By comparison, even though the Tau do live in a highly regimented and caste-based society, they rarely, if ever, suffer from the same sort of inequality. There are a few real-world comparisons going on here, but I'd like to start with the main one that's talked about, mostly through memes in the community, that the Tau are space communists. Sure, the concept of the greater good is similar in a lot of ways to some of the overall ideas of communism, one of which being from each according to their ability and to each according to their need. This does indeed sound very similar to the concept of the greater good, but in reality, a communist society is characterized by a few main things. Common ownership of the means of production, with free access to the articles of consumption, and it's a classless, stateless, and moneyless society. The Tao Empire definitely is not that. We can see that in the fact that their whole governmental structure is really based around a very strict hierarchy. This is one where individuals are born into a role and level in their social structure. There's also functionally no collective ownership of property that we can see in the lore. If anyone has any examples to contradict this, please let me know. Like most things in 40k, the Tau are at least somewhat of a caricature. Their government does look like some of the more negative aspects of communist governments that are usually portrayed in Western media. Many of the negative traits that we see in their empire, that people say are communist, are usually more similar to anti-communist propaganda from the early to mid-20th century. I grew up in a Western country and there was still definitely a lot of anti-communist information in the school curriculum, and a lot of it has actually stuck with me even today. Some of it is reminiscent of at least some of the lore around the Tao Empire. The re-education camps I mentioned earlier are a great example. There were various campaigns, even as recently as the 1980s, led by Amnesty International, that looked to rescue Soviet dissenters from mental institutions. These people were sent there for criticising the communist system, something that clearly meant they weren't mentally fit for regular society. So there are clearly direct and valid criticisms of real communist governments in the rising of the Tao Empire. But quelling dissent is far from a unique trait of communist governments. Yes, finding any information about Tank Man in China is very difficult, but there are plenty of anti-communist Western countries that do that sort of thing too. Even recently, in the United Kingdom, the Irish language group NECAP came under terror charges from the British government. NECAP have been outspoken critics of the British government's support for what the UN, numerous human rights groups, and many genocide scholars, including Israeli experts, describe as the ongoing genocide in Gaza. One band member was charged with waving a flag at a concert years ago, before the group had reached their current level of fame, and therefore before they had a platform to make their criticisms widely heard. When we look at the modern world, many Western democracies claim to offer choice and prosperity, but scratch the surface and you'll find systems that value things like GDP growth and shareholder returns more than actual quality of life. Just like the Tao, our societies seem to measure success by how well the system functions, not how much freedom or dignity individuals really have. When it comes to good or bad guys though, like pretty much all the factions in the setting, the Tao are definitely not the good guys. Some of the most interesting aspects to their lore are in their ability to mirror some of the ways in which the Imperium struggles against itself. The Tao are able to reverse engineer alien technology that they come across. They will progress their understanding of the universe and technological ability through science and aren't held back by dogma like the Imperium is. The Imperium is definitely an evil regime. That's what's written at the beginning of nearly every piece of Warhammer fiction, after all. They believe that it's their manifest destiny to conquer the galaxy in the name of the God Emperor of mankind. They truly believe that the galaxy is theirs for the taking, and it is their birthright to cleanse the stars of any other sentient races that might also be out there. The Tau also have a similar manifest destiny mirrored in their own greater good. They believe that it's not just their right, but their duty to bring the galaxy under their benevolent rule. This is very similar to real-world beliefs in things like the aforementioned manifest destiny and things like the white man's burden. Just as a quick explainer here, manifest destiny is a term used often by characters in the lore and other YouTube 40k creators. It refers to the 19th century belief that settlers in the United States had a divine right and duty to expand across North America. This was a myth created by individuals who definitely benefited from this westward expansion. It also led to the displacement and ethnic cleansing of communities that already lived there. Even at the time, it was considered highly controversial, with many contemporary US leaders, like US President Ulysses S. Grant, rejecting its fundamental and honestly bigoted premise. When the term is used in relation to the lore, it's normally used to show just how evil it is. The imperial belief in this ideology shows how dogmatic, highly emotional, and unreasoning they are. That a term like that is so casually used just shows how deeply wrong the Imperium is. White Man's Burden, on the other hand, comes from a Rudyard Kipling poem. He was trying to justify invasion and colonization of other parts of the world. The general belief was that savages in other places needed the benefits that enlightened imperialism would bring. It is widely accepted by historians, economists, and experts in pretty much every related field that colonialism usually had far more negative than positive impacts on the communities that had to deal with it. Even so, there are still people, including some contemporary world leaders, that actually still adhere to that thought. The Games Workshop writers use terms like these for a few reasons. They do sound impactful, and they're written in a style of language that's not commonly used anymore. Also, They show very succinctly how misguided and ill-intentioned the motivations are for these factions. After all, how else are we to keep this galaxy of eternal war going if we don't have characters with the motivations necessary to stay in the fight? I want to take a quick moment here just first of all to talk about the channel. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to create these videos and get them up in the best way possible. They're taking me a bit longer than I'd like. At the moment, I can probably create about 2 per month. I'd like to get those numbers up, but realistically that's not going to happen at the moment, at least not while the channel is this size. If I can grow it out and if I'm able to monetize it a bit, then I should be able to justify putting more time, effort and money back into it. But at the moment, it's still going to have to be sporadic uploads for at least a little while. I really do enjoy the process of writing these videos and engaging with both the fictional material and the real world analogies to it. I want to keep bringing more of that to you all as much as I can. For the content on this channel, obviously, if I'm making anything to do with the real world and very controversial topics like governments, wars, and obviously hammers as well, I'm going to come across people that have strong opinions about all of these things. My goal here is mostly to educate and maybe, if we're all a little lucky, entertain. I have my own biases, as we all do. I try to acknowledge them as much as I reasonably can whenever it makes the most sense. Having said that, there's always going to be people who just won't be happy. Also, I just want to say that anyone who doesn't debate in good faith in the comments, who says anything bigoted or anything like that, they will be blocked. This is a welcoming space, and I want to encourage learning, debate, and community. And that's just not possible when people use hateful rhetoric, misinformation, or are just generally dismissive of others. Now that I've gotten that quick disclaimer out of the way, I want to talk about some of the real-world comparisons I found between the Tau and actual communist and other governments. Yikes. So, when I was researching this video, I wanted to find more examples to communist countries that would suit some of the more negative aspects of Tau lore. There are definitely some, like considering dissent to be a form of mental illness, but I also found some more positive examples too. I think they're definitely worth mentioning here. Now, I'm not telling anyone to join the Red Army, but I think there are some interesting comparisons that I would like to talk about. When it comes to governmental structures, I was expecting the Tao government to be more similar to present-day China. China has had the same leader for a long time, and Xi isn't really talked about too fondly in Western media. I'm sure that China's government was more top-down in the past, but these days, at least the claim from the Communist Party of China is that they have an intricate and active system of local governments. In the past 10 years or so, the Chinese government has instituted what they call a whole process democracy. This tries to be from the bottom up and claims to judge success based on tangible socio-economic improvements to people's lives. Their critique of the more liberal Western democracies is that things like that can be more performative and success is based around democratic outcomes and little else. Now, I think that's a genuinely fair critique of a lot of Western democracies. Too little thought is really put into people's quality of life. I've personally worked on a number of national and local campaigns here in Ireland, and I've worked for different government departments, and I'd love to see success measured more in terms of actual real-world outcomes rather than just election results. Now, this is obviously state language, and I think I need to see a little more evidence to suggest that this method of doing things would actually work better, but I'll try to genuinely keep an open mind to it, even if I am a little bit skeptical of it. Like the Tao, the Chinese have improved their economic growth massively in a very short amount of time. The Tao went from hunter-gatherers to a spacefaring civilization in only a few thousand years. Similarly, in real life, many other communist governments have generated massive socio-economic improvements in almost no time at all. There are times when they have been so quick to do this that plenty of other countries try to follow suit. In the real world, some of the biggest improvements to quality of life and economies of countries were indeed seen in communist-run nations. The Soviet Union is probably the best example of this. They went from a hugely unequal kingdom with a literacy rate of about 40% in 1917. They kept having massive famines every few years for centuries, and within about 40 years, they became the first spacefaring civilization. During that time, they fought off invasions from every developed nation during their first couple of years of existence. Then, they suffered the lion's share of civilian deaths caused by World War II, all while doing the lion's share of damage to the Wehrmacht. In the 1920s and 30s, the Soviet Union was seen by many as an example for other nations who wanted to modernize rapidly. Ireland tried in the first few years of independence, but it turns out we really don't have nearly as much of the resources that the Soviets did on our island, great though it is. The rapid growth also came at a human cost that wasn't apparent enough at the time, Poor state planning for collectivization, coupled with fierce resistance from landowners, triggered terrible famines. This is nothing to say of the forced labour or horrible repression under figures like Stalin and his intelligence officer Beria. I know that Ireland had its own forced labour in the form of Magdalen laundries, and as evil as they were definitely not on the same scale as that of Soviet gulags. Yet even modern open market nations still have issues like this. Plenty of places that have nothing to do with communism have seen almost shockingly rapid growth in almost no time at all. But when you dig a little deeper, this growth can often come at a serious cost. In certain countries in the Arabian Gulf, there have been plenty of credible accusations of horrific labour abuses against migrant workers. In Qatar, according to Amnesty International, around 15,000 workers died in the country between 2010 and 2019. It's easy to point fingers at authoritarian regimes, and fun too, but Western countries aren't free of their own contradictions. Elections happen, yes, but if you can't afford healthcare, housing, or a decent living for you and your family, even after a hard day's work, how much freedom do you really have? It's the same illusion the Tao offer. Your choices matter, but only so long as they serve the greater good, and that's not really something you have any say over. So, is the Tao Empire the real villain of Warhammer 40k? No, I don't think so. Yes, they absolutely do horrible things, and I doubt that I'd like to live there if I had the choice. While they do seem to have a relatively higher quality of life than most other polities in the galaxy, it still isn't that great. If you're a free-thinking individual, you won't really find much for you in the Tao Empire. As a Tao, you're born into a social caste, and there is precious little in the way of changing roles or improving one's lot in life. They have little in the way of family structure or romantic relationships, with even these things being highly regulated by the ethereal caste. That's the ruling caste of Tao society. There are instances in the lore of them taking advantage of their privilege over their lessers. Just how evil the ethereals are varies from writer to writer. In the Farsight novel series by Phil Kelly, I can remember reading about a Tao evacuation of a Sept world. On a crowded train, plenty of Tao crushed themselves to death just so a single member of that caste didn't have to suffer the indignity of sharing too close a space with the other refugees. There's also the ending to one of the expansions for the original Dawn of War game. If the Tau are victorious in the campaign, then the remaining human population of the world are secretly sterilized in a clandestine effort to repopulate the world. But to be fair, that ending isn't canon. There are plenty of moments of evil and villainy that both the Tau as a whole and individual Tau commit in the lore. I'm sure you can all think of other examples, make sure to leave them in the comments below, but that's not where the real evil of the Tau Empire comes in. I believe their evil comes into play much in the same way as the Imperium. Not the exact same, obviously, but certainly similar. The Tau are often a mirror to the Imperium. They do many of the same evil things as the Imperium of Man. Tau citizens and client species are subject to plenty of hardship and suffering. But what's more, they will also invade other parts of the galaxy to expand their empire. While it might be true that the Tau can usually offer those it conquers a higher quality of life, that's not always the case. And even if the Tau were able to give that, it's still subjective. Plenty of real-world countries have done this exact thing too. Invading somewhere else, claiming to give them democracy or a superior way of life has been used to justify plenty of wars, even in just my own lifetime. Yet much of these conflicts have just resulted in unnecessary death and even more suffering for the regular people on the receiving end of the invasion, which was there in the first place, supposedly, to help them. So in the end, the Tau aren't the heroes of Warhammer 40k. Often they're not even a softer alternative to the Imperium. They're something else entirely. A vision of progress and harmony that hides how little freedom you actually have. And that's where their danger lies. The Imperium doesn't pretend to be just. It just rules through fear, cruelty, and endless war. The Tau, they don't need chains or torture chambers or servitors when the system itself makes resistance unthinkable. That's the genius and the horror of the greater good. And maybe that's not so alien after all. In our world, you don't need to outlaw dissent if people are too exhausted, too indebted, or too distracted to survive. Or if all the outlets for dissent are heavily regulated or start to gradually disappear. Submission doesn't always look like a firing squad. Sometimes it looks like a society that convinces you there was never any other choice. The Imperium is a nightmare that knows it's a nightmare. The Tau believe they're the dream, and that might just make them one of the most realistically evil factions in Warhammer 40k. But what do you think? I know I left out loads of stuff. This is obviously a huge topic, and there's plenty to say. I want to talk about other aspects of the Tau in future, like Commander Farsight, but was there anything that I missed or that you'd like included? If you like this video and want to see more deep dives into lore and the real world, please make sure to give it a like. It helps more than you might think. If you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss out on the next one. Speaking of which, my upcoming video will be a sequel to my video on threats to the Imperium. I'm going to use real-world policy-making criteria to analyse some more threats to the Imperium of Man. I think that you'll really enjoy it. Also, I'll try to be a little more upbeat in that one than I might have been here. If you want to catch the first video in that series, there should be a link somewhere on the screen or in the description. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.